Karen started harassed a disabled little girl in a wheelchair. What began as a simple shopping trip quickly turned into a battle when Karen started pushing the wheelchair and shouting cruel words at the child. But what Karen didn't know was that the father standing behind them was the chief of police, and he wasn't about to let her get away with it. What happened with Karen for this watch video till end. It was a typical afternoon when Lily and her father went out to the store. Lily is 9 years old and has cerebral palsy, so she uses a wheelchair. Recently, Lily had been feeling very down and stressed. She had been struggling with feelings of sadness and tension, not understanding why she felt that way. Seeing his daughter so upset, her father knew he had to do something to cheer her up. For watching more videos, please subscribe my channel. To lift her spirits, he decided to take her to the store. Lily loved shopping, and her father hoped that picking out a new toy would help brighten her mood. As they entered the store, Lily's face lit up a little. She began to take her time, carefully looking at the shelves for the toy she had been wanting for weeks. Despite the sadness she had been carrying, Lily's excitement slowly started to return. Her father smiled, watching her carefully pick out the toy. He was happy to see her focused and enjoying the moment. It wasn't just about the toy, it was about giving Lily a break from her worries and reminding her that she could still enjoy the simple things in life, like a peaceful trip to the store with her dad. The first encounter with Karen happened when Lily and her father were moving through the store aisles. Lily was slowly making her way through the store in her wheelchair, taking her time to pick out a toy she really wanted. Her father was walking beside her, making sure she was comfortable and happy as they shopped together. But not everyone in the store was as patient. Karen, a frustrated and impatient shopper, was in a hurry. She was behind them in the aisle and began to get annoyed. She muttered under her breath at first, but soon she couldn't hold it in anymore. "Come on. You're so slow. Move out of the way." Karen snapped, her voice loud and rude. Her impatience was clear and her anger was starting to show. Lily, who was already feeling a little down that day, didn't know what to make of Karen's harsh words. She looked up at her father, confused as Karen pushed past them. But Karen wasn't done. She turned around and started shouting again. "People like you shouldn't even be out here. You're taking up too much space and making everyone wait," she yelled. Lily's father felt his anger rise. He could see how uncomfortable Karen's words were making his daughter. He knew that Lily had enough to deal with already, and now she was being attacked by a stranger for no reason. The tension in the air grew as Karen continued to criticize them. Lily was already feeling anxious, and Karen's words only made things worse. Her father stayed calm, trying to shield Lily from the harsh comments, but Karen didn't stop. It was clear she didn't care about how her words affected them. Karen's cruelty escalated quickly. After shouting rude comments, she wasn't satisfied. In a fit of anger, she pushed past the father and shoved Lily's wheelchair, making sure to push it roughly as she passed. The sudden jolt startled Lily. Her body shook as the unexpected force made her feel unsteady and unsafe. She trembled in fear, not understanding why this stranger was being so mean to her. Lily had been feeling down that day, and now this woman's cruel behavior made everything worse. Her eyes filled with tears as she began to cry. She didn't know how to process what had just happened. Why was this woman so angry at her? She clutched the armrests of her wheelchair, feeling more vulnerable than ever before. Karen didn't seem to care about Lily's distress. Instead, she kept yelling, her words sharp and hurtful. "People like you shouldn't even be out here. You're just taking up space and slowing everyone down," she mocked. Her words stung like a slap, and Lily could hardly believe that someone would be so mean to her for no reason at all. The father stood frozen for a moment, shocked by the sudden change in Karen's behavior. His heart broke seeing his daughter in so much pain. But he couldn't stay quiet anymore. He took a deep breath and stepped in front of Lily's wheelchair, putting himself between her and Karen. His voice was firm, but he tried to stay calm, not wanting the situation to escalate even further. "Stop it right now," he said, his voice growing stronger. "You have no right to talk to my daughter like that. Leave us alone." Karen sneered at him, her face twisted in anger. "What are you going to do about it?" she shouted. "You can't stop me." His heart was pounding in his chest, but the father stood his ground. He wasn't about to let this woman hurt his daughter anymore. He kept his calm, but his anger was clear in his eyes. "I said stop. If you don't, I'll call the police," he warned. Karen's face changed for a second, surprised by the threat, but she just laughed and spat a final insult before walking away. The father stayed close to Lily, protecting her while trying to calm her down. He whispered gently, "It's okay, sweetie. You're safe now." Lily continued to cry, but she was comforted by the fact that her father was there for her, standing up against the cruelty she had just faced. Without any warning, Karen did something that shocked everyone. She raised her hand and slapped Lily hard on the head. The loud sound of the slap echoed through the store, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The air was filled with a stunned silence as people looked around in disbelief. Lily, who had already been upset, screamed in pain as the slap hit her. She was not prepared for it, and the sudden shock left her gasping for breath. Tears started to pour down her cheeks as she instinctively reached up to touch her head, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The pain was sharp and it felt like her whole body was shaking. Her father's heart sank. Seeing his daughter, who was already struggling with feelings of sadness, now in physical pain, was too much to bear. He had tried to stay calm and protect her from the harsh words, but this was different. This was no longer just about rude comments or insults. This was physical harm. He could see the hurt and confusion in Lily's eyes as she held her head, her small body trembling from the shock. Lily's sobs grew louder, and she looked up at her father, seeking comfort. The father's own heart ached as he realized how deeply this had affected his daughter. He was filled with a mix of emotions, anger, heartbreak, and a fierce protectiveness that couldn't be ignored. His daughter did not deserve this. No one deserved to be treated this way. With every ounce of his strength, the father tried to stay composed. But deep down he knew he could not let this go. Karen had crossed a line that could never be erased. His daughter had been hurt, and now it was time to make sure she was protected. He stepped forward, blocking Karen's view of Lily and stepping between them. His voice was firm, though he felt a deep anger rising inside him. "That's enough," he said through gritted teeth. "You do not hit my daughter. This is not over." Karen just stood there looking smug for a moment, but then she began to laugh. She didn't realize what she had just done. The father, heartbroken and enraged, knew that he had to take action to protect his daughter. This was no longer just a verbal fight. The father, who had always been calm and composed, felt a surge of anger like never before. He had always tried to stay patient and handle situations peacefully, but this was different. Seeing his daughter hurt, both physically and emotionally, crossed a line he couldn't ignore. His heart raced with fury as he turned to face Karen, who was still standing there, acting like nothing had happened. "Enough," the father said, his voice steady but filled with anger. "You've gone too far. You hurt my daughter, and now you'll have to face the consequences." Karen, unfazed by his words, smirked at him. She clearly didn't think there would be any real consequences. "What are you going to do about it?" she taunted, her voice loud and challenging. She stepped closer to him, daring him to make a move. The father was calm on the outside, but inside he was burning with rage. He knew he had to stay focused. His daughter's safety was more important than anything else. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his cool, and reached into his pocket. He pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking with anger as he dialed the number he knew he had to call. 911, what's your emergency? The operator answered. This is the chief of police, the father said calmly, his voice controlled despite the storm inside. I need assistance immediately. A woman is harassing my disabled daughter. She just slapped her, and now I need someone here right away. Karen's smirk vanished instantly. Her face turned pale as she realized she had made a terrible mistake. She looked at the father in shock, her eyes wide with fear. She had no idea that the person she had just been taunting and bullying was the chief of police. Wait. Karen stammered, panic rising in her voice. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I didn't know. Please, I'm sorry. But it was too late. The father's voice remained firm as he held the phone, giving the operator the details. You've gone too far, he said coldly. There's nothing to apologize for now. Karen stood there trying to apologize, but the damage was done. She had crossed a line, and now she would face the consequences for what she had done to his daughter. The sound of sirens grew louder, and within minutes the police arrived at the store. The officers quickly walked through the aisles, their eyes scanning the situation. They had already received the details from the father's 911 call, and they knew exactly what they needed to do. Karen, who had been standing there trying to apologize, froze as she saw the officers approach. Her face turned pale, and the smirk that had been on her face earlier disappeared completely. She realized that her actions were not just going to be ignored anymore. She was about to face the consequences. The officers didn't waste any time. They moved swiftly, handcuffing Karen and reading her rights. She was still in shock, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to say something, but the officers ignored her. They had a job to do, and Karen was now going to be arrested for her actions. As Karen was led away by the police, The store employees and customers stood in stunned silence, watching the scene unfold. The atmosphere in the store had shifted from confusion and tension to a quiet understanding that this was no small matter. People started to whisper among themselves, some in disbelief that such a thing could happen in a public place. Lily, still shaken by the events, looked up at her father. She was clutching her head where Karen had slapped her earlier, her tears still fresh on her cheeks. Her father could see the pain in her eyes, and he immediately moved to comfort her. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close and gently rocking her back and forth to help her calm down. "It's okay, sweetie," he whispered softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're safe now. You didn't do anything wrong. You never deserved any of this." Lily sniffled, trying to hold back more tears, and looked up at her father. "Why did she do that to me?" she asked, her voice small and full of confusion. The father sighed, his heart aching for her. "Some people don't understand, sweetheart. They hurt others because they're angry or afraid, but that's never your fault. People like her need to be held accountable for their actions. What she did was wrong, and now she'll face the consequences." Lily nodded, feeling comforted by her father's words. She was still scared, but at least now she knew her father would always be there to protect her. The courtroom was quiet as the case was presented. Karen stood before the judge, looking nervous, while the father sat in the witness stand, his expression serious but calm. This was the moment when the truth would be told, and there was no turning back. The father took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I was with my daughter Lily in the store that day," he said. "We were just trying to have a peaceful outing, but Karen came up to us, shouting at us to hurry up. She didn't like that my daughter, who uses a wheelchair, was taking her time. She called us names and started yelling at Lily for no reason." The father paused for a moment, his eyes filled with the memory of the pain his daughter had suffered. "Then Karen pushed past me and shoved Lily's wheelchair. My daughter was startled, and I could see the fear in her eyes. It wasn't just words anymore, she physically hurt her. And then she slapped Lily on the head. I had to step in and protect my daughter, and I knew I couldn't just let it go." He looked down at Lily, who was sitting quietly beside him. "I couldn't let her get away with hurting my child. No one should ever treat anyone like that, especially a disabled child." The courtroom was silent as the father's words sank in. The evidence was clear. The store employees and other shoppers who had witnessed the incident gave their statements, confirming the father's account. They spoke about how they had seen Karen shove Lily's wheelchair and heard her cruel words. Karen, standing on the other side, tried to defend herself. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I was just frustrated. They were taking too long, and I didn't think it was such a big deal," she said, her voice shaky but still defiant. "It wasn't my fault." But the judge wasn't convinced. He turned to Karen, his expression serious. "The evidence is clear. You physically assaulted this young girl, and your actions were uncalled for. Your attempt to downplay the situation is not acceptable." Karen's face turned pale as she realized the gravity of the situation. The judge had no sympathy for her excuses, and it was clear that she would face the consequences of her actions. The courtroom was quiet as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Everyone was waiting for the decision, especially the father, who had been through so much to get to this point. He had told his story, and the evidence was clear. Now it was time for Karen to face the consequences of her actions. The judge looked at Karen, then at the father and Lily. "After reviewing all the evidence, including witness testimonies and the impact of your actions on this child, I have reached a decision," the judge said, his voice firm. "Karen, your behavior was unacceptable. You physically assaulted a disabled child, which caused emotional harm to both her and her father." The judge paused for a moment before continuing, his gaze stern. "For your actions, I am sentencing you to a fine of $2,000 for harassment and assault. Additionally, due to the physical harm and emotional distress you caused, you will serve 15 days in jail." Karen's face went pale and she opened her mouth to say something, but she was cut off by the judge. "This is not up for discussion. The evidence is clear and the law must be followed. You will face the consequences of your actions." Karen stood there in shock, her eyes wide with fear as the reality of the situation sank in. She had hoped for a lighter sentence, but the judge showed no mercy. She had hurt a defenseless child, and now she had to pay for it. The father, though still angry and upset by what had happened, felt a sense of relief. He had been through so much, watching his daughter suffer both physically and emotionally. But now he knew that justice had been served. Karen would be held accountable for what she had done to his child. He looked over at Lily, who was sitting quietly beside him. Though she was still shaken, he could see a small sense of peace in her eyes. She would be okay. The father took her hand and gently squeezed it, offering her a reassuring smile. "You're safe now, sweetie," he whispered. "Everything will be all right." As Karen was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the father felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had done everything he could to protect his daughter, and now justice had been served. As the courtroom doors opened, the father gently took Lily's hand, guiding her out of the building. The bright sunlight outside felt different now, as if the weight of the past days had finally been lifted. The air was a little fresher, and the noise of the busy street felt quieter in comparison to the tension they had both felt during the trial. Lily, still a little shaken from everything that had happened, walked beside her father, her head held low. She had been through so much in such a short time, and even though the court had ruled in their favor, she was still trying to process it all. Her small steps were slower now, but she no longer looked as afraid as she had before. She looked up at her father, and for the first time in a while, she gave him a small smile. Her father smiled back, his heart swelling with relief. He could see the change in her eyes, a sense of peace that wasn't there before. She was still his little girl, but something inside her had shifted. She felt safer now, knowing that no one would hurt her again without consequences, and that her father would always be there to protect her. As they reached the car, the father knelt down to look Lily in the eyes. He could see how much she had been through, and he knew this was the moment to say what was in his heart. "You did great today, sweetie," he said softly. "I'm so proud of you. No matter what happens, you need to remember this. You are strong and you have the right to stand up for yourself. I will always protect you no matter what. You don't have to face anything alone ever again." Lily nodded, her eyes brimming with emotion. She squeezed her father's hand tightly. "I know, Dad. I feel better now," she said in a quiet voice. The father stood up, reflecting on how much this experience had taught them both. He realized that it wasn't just about protecting his daughter from physical harm, it was about teaching her to stand up for herself and fight against cruelty. He had shown her that standing up to injustice was important, and that sometimes, even the smallest voice could make a big difference. As they drove home, Lily sat quietly beside him, feeling a little braver, a little stronger. The road ahead might still have its challenges, but she knew one thing for sure. With her father by her side, she could face anything.